When Jake first met Sarah, he thought he had found the perfect woman. She was everything he had ever dreamed of, kind, thoughtful, and beautiful. They built a life together, slowly but steadily, with trust being the foundation of their marriage. But over time, Jake began noticing small changes in Sarah's behavior. Late nights at work, secretive phone calls, and an increasing distance between them. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was just the pressures of everyday life. But deep down, a feeling gnawed at him, a quiet suspicion that something wasn't right. One night, when Sarah's phone rang during dinner, Jake couldn't ignore it any longer. She stepped out to answer, but not before he caught a glimpse of a name flashing on the screen. Mark. The name didn't sound familiar, and the way Sarah quickly locked the phone raised a red flag. He decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, Jake followed Sarah discreetly, keeping his suspicions to himself. What he discovered shattered his world. Sarah wasn't working late or running errands. She was meeting Mark, a man Jake had never heard of before. The lies began to unfold in front of him, and the truth became undeniable. His wife, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was having an affair. Jake felt betrayed, but it wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was a deceit, the way Sarah had twisted the truth so effortlessly. The anger bubbled inside him, and a plan for revenge started to take form. However, Jake wasn't going to seek vengeance in the typical way. He wanted to expose everything, make Sarah face the consequences of her actions, and ultimately gain redemption for himself. He began by gathering evidence. Photographs, recordings, and messages that would prove the affair beyond a shadow of a doubt. But Jake didn't want to confront Sarah immediately. Instead, he reached out to Mark, the man who had stolen his wife's affection. Mark, a smooth-talking corporate exec, thought his affair was a secret, hidden behind the facades of work and social gatherings. But he didn't know that Jake had been watching him too. Jake arranged a meeting with Mark, using a carefully crafted story to get him to confess. When Mark, arrogant and confident, sat across from Jake, he thought he was about to smooth things over. But Jake had already played his cards. He revealed everything: Sarah's lies, the secret rendezvous, and even Mark's own vulnerabilities. The confrontation was intense. Mark's bravado crumbled as Jake laid bare the truth. Mark tried to talk his way out of it, but it was too late. Jake had everything he needed to destroy Mark's reputation, his career, and his personal life. But Jake wasn't interested in destroying Mark entirely. He just wanted him to feel the weight of his actions. The real moment of reckoning came when Jake finally confronted Sarah. He had everything he needed, and when she saw the proof laid out before her, the tears began to flow. But there was no escaping the consequences. Sarah had betrayed Jake's trust in the worst way possible, and now she had to face it. Jake didn't want to hurt Sarah, but he wanted her to understand the depth of her betrayal. He revealed everything to their friends and family, how she had lied, manipulated, and deceived him for months. Sarah's world crumbled as her affair was exposed, and she had to come to terms with the fact that her lies had not only destroyed her marriage, but also her reputation. But redemption, Jake realized, wasn't about punishing Sarah or Mark. It was about reclaiming his life. He walked away from the wreckage, not seeking vengeance anymore, but searching for peace. The process of exposing the lies, confronting the pain, and reclaiming his power allowed Jake to heal. In the end, Sarah was left to rebuild her life, with no one to blame but herself. Mark's career took a hit, and his personal life was never the same. But Jake, through all the hurt and betrayal, found his own path to redemption. He learned that in the face of deceit, the real victory lies in reclaiming your integrity and moving forward. As the weeks passed, Jake found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Despite the satisfaction of exposing the truth, he couldn't ignore the empty space that Sarah once filled. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now felt cold and lifeless. But Jake had made a conscious decision. He wouldn't let this betrayal define him. Slowly, he focused on rebuilding his life, piece by piece. He sought therapy, not only to heal from the heartbreak, but to rediscover himself. The therapy sessions revealed something profound. Jake had been too focused on pleasing others, on making his marriage perfect, while neglecting his own needs. He had sacrificed parts of his identity in an effort to keep the peace. But now, in the aftermath of the betrayal, he had an opportunity to rediscover his worth. Jake spent more time with his friends, reconnecting with people he had lost touch with during the years of his marriage. He rediscovered his love for hiking, an activity he had always enjoyed but abandoned to cater to Sarah's interests. Slowly, he learned how to be content on his own, without the constant need for validation or approval from others. Meanwhile, Sarah's life was unraveling in ways she hadn't anticipated. As her affair was exposed, her social circle began to distance themselves. Some of their mutual friends couldn't look past her lies, while others blamed her for breaking the trust of someone who had loved her unconditionally. Her career, which had once been flourishing, began to show signs of strain. The corporate world was unforgiving, and the whispers about her personal life began to seep into her professional life, causing irreparable damage. It wasn't long before Sarah sought out Jake, desperate for reconciliation. She had been humbled, stripped of the life she had once known. But Jake, despite the pain and anger that still lingered, had moved on. He didn't welcome her apology with open arms. Instead, he recognized that she wasn't the woman he had married anymore. She had changed, and so had he. The truth was, they both needed to change. "I know I betrayed you, Jake," Sarah said, her voice trembling as she sat across from him. "But I'm sorry. I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try to make things right. I need to make amends." Jake looked at her for a long moment. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but he also knew that the path ahead wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about moving forward separately. "I can't go back to the way things were, Sarah," he said quietly. "The trust we had is gone. What you did, it cut deep, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that." Sarah's eyes welled up with tears, but Jake remained firm. He understood that forgiveness was something he had to give for himself, but it wasn't something that came easily. There was too much hurt between them, too many lies that couldn't be erased with a simple apology. Jake walked away from the conversation not with anger, but with closure. He realized that his true redemption wasn't tied to Sarah or Mark. It was about reclaiming his own life, his dignity, and his future. By confronting the lies, he had not only exposed the truth, but had also found the strength to heal. Months passed, and life started to feel a little brighter. Jake met someone new, a woman who shared his love for adventure and the simple joys of life. There was no rush, no pressure to rush into anything, but he allowed himself to be open to the possibility of love again. He no longer viewed relationships as a means of validation, but rather as an opportunity to grow alongside someone who respected him as he was. Sarah, on the other hand, struggled with the consequences of her actions. She spent years trying to rebuild her life and career, but the damage was done. She never fully recovered from the fallout of her affair, and she came to understand the weight of what she had lost. Jake, the man who had loved her unconditionally, was no longer in her life. In the end, Jake didn't need vengeance to find peace. His journey of revenge had been about exposing the truth, but his real victory was in his ability to move forward and rebuild his life on his own terms. As he walked down a path of redemption, he realized that sometimes the best revenge wasn't about punishing those who had wronged you. It was about taking control of your own story, finding your own happiness, and letting go of the past. Jake's heart was no longer weighed down by bitterness. He had learned that healing wasn't a destination, but a continuous process. The lies and deceit that once defined his relationship with Sarah had faded, and what remained was a man who had reclaimed his life, his strength, and his peace. As Jake moved forward, he started to embrace the freedom that came with releasing the pain of the past. It wasn't an easy journey. He still had moments where the memories of Sarah, their life together, and the betrayal crept into his thoughts, but he didn't let them define him. Instead, he found solace in small victories. Completing a challenging hike, finishing a book he had always wanted to read, or enjoying quiet evenings with friends. It was in these moments that Jake realized how much he had neglected himself during the years of his marriage. One day, while out for a solo hike, Jake sat on a rocky ledge overlooking a peaceful valley. He felt a deep sense of contentment, as if he had reached a turning point in his life. The mountains had always been a source of peace for him, and now, more than ever, he understood why. Nature had a way of reminding him that life went on, regardless of the pain or hardships one faced. It was cyclical, always evolving, and Jake felt himself growing alongside it. In the midst of this newfound clarity, Jake received a call from his old friend Tom, who had been a constant support through the turmoil. They made plans to meet for dinner, and as Jake shared the progress he had made in healing, Tom couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. "You've really come a long way, man," Tom said, his voice full of admiration. "You've turned something painful into an opportunity to grow. That's not something a lot of people can do." Jake smiled, appreciating his friend's words. He had spent so much time focusing on the betrayal that he had forgotten to acknowledge how strong he had become in the process. The revenge, while satisfying in its own right, had ultimately led him to rediscover his inner strength, something no one could take from him. A few weeks later, Jake found himself unexpectedly in a familiar situation. He was at a mutual friend's birthday party when he saw Sarah across the room. She was standing by the food table, speaking quietly to someone, and for a moment, their eyes met. Jake's heart didn't skip a beat. There was no anger, no desire for revenge, just an odd sense of calm. He realized he no longer felt the weight of the betrayal. The hurt had dissipated with time, and he could look at Sarah without the pain that once defined his view of her. Sarah saw the change in Jake immediately. She had been struggling, carrying the guilt of her actions every day, but seeing him standing there at peace and content made her feel the full depth of what she had lost. They exchanged a brief, polite greeting, but nothing more. There was no animosity between them anymore. Just two people who had once shared a life, but now had very different paths. That night, as Jake walked home, he thought about how much he had changed. The journey of exposing the truth, confronting the lies, and facing the hurt had been difficult, but it had led him to a place where he could finally let go. He was no longer the man defined by Sarah's betrayal. He was a man who had rebuilt his life and his happiness. Months later, Jake found himself in a relationship again, though this time, things were different. He wasn't searching for validation, nor was he trying to fill a void. Instead, he embraced the idea of building something meaningful with someone who respected him for who he was, flaws and all. The woman he had met, Emma, was kind, open, and had her own journey of growth. They took things slow, allowing their connection to unfold naturally, and Jake found that he could trust again, not because he had to, but because he had healed enough to do so freely. As the years passed, Jake looked back on the journey with a sense of gratitude. The pain of his past marriage had ultimately led him to a deeper understanding of himself and what he wanted from life. He had learned that revenge, when carried out with an intent for justice rather than anger, could be a catalyst for personal growth and change. But the true victory came when he stopped defining himself by the betrayal and began defining his life by his own choices. And so, Jake moved forward with a renewed sense of purpose. The man who had once been consumed by lies and deceit was now someone who had learned to live with honesty and integrity, someone who was capable of love, not because it filled a void, but because it was a choice that added to his already fulfilling life. He had found redemption, not through vengeance, but through forgiveness, growth, and the ability to walk away from a painful chapter with his head held high, ready for whatever came next.